Since that time, in the past few weeks, basically, Israel has killed over 100 Palestinians and injured over 7,000 Palestinians. Just in the past 24 hours, 60 people were killed, including an 8-month-old baby. So Israel gave orders to its soldiers to shoot people who even come within like 150 meters of the fence. To them, death by hunger is not any more merciful than death by bullets through the heads.
There are 3 daily habits that are destroying your memories, and you will lose 10% of your brain by the age of 55 and 20% of your brain by the age of 75. It'll actually shrink if you do not do something about this. There is a free workshop that you can partake in where you'll learn what these 3 habits are, how to fix it, and how to regain your memories. There's a link below in the description on how to sign up. Be sure to sign up. It's free information. Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. I have Mazin Qumsiyeh back on the program. He is connecting with me from Palestine. And I got to tell you, the last 24 hours before this interview, there has been over 60 people killed and over 2,700 people injured in Palestine. It has been rocking and shaking their world lately. In fact, we had originally scheduled this interview to happen last Thursday, but he got delayed because they were setting up tents on the border to protest, and they were all tear gassed. There has been many, many more attacks against their people. The unfortunate part of the last 24 hours is that, well, I don't know how unfortunate, I don't know how you can even categorize it, but over the last 24 hours with all these murders and injuries, not a single Israeli soldier was injured. So it was a very one-sided situation. The 2,700 injured people, they expect a lot more of those people to die because the hospitals in Gaza do not have the supplies that they need. This has been one of the bloodiest days in a long time in the Palestinian area, and the whole situation is escalating over there. And he comes on and explains what's going on, his views, what he believes of the whole situation. He just wants peace. So many of those people just want peace and to accept all people of all types. Having peace is so important. And he sticks after and gives us an overview, gives us some information on what Netanyahu really is like, and what his background really is, and how he's profiting on this whole situation. I think it's pretty enlightening. You can get that for patrons. It's as little as $1 a month to be one of my patrons, and it is how I support my living and this channel. And I hope it's really valuable to you, and it's worth $1 or more if you can afford that to support this channel. So let's get into that interview now with Mazin Qumsiyeh. Hello, Mazin. Thank you so much for rejoining the program.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Sarah, and with your audience.
We were scheduled to talk on Thursday, but you had an incident at the Palestinian-Israeli border in Bethlehem. Can you tell me what happened?
No, every day almost there's some incidents. And today, for example, I was subjected to tear gas with the demonstrators in Bethlehem, and I already have a severe headache. It's been a hectic week, actually, since that time, because, as you know, there's a number of events that happened, including Trump deciding after he withdrew from the climate change treaty, he withdrew from the nuclear treaty and with Iran, and then there was further demonstrations and blockage of roads. And I teach at 2 universities, Bethlehem and Birzeit, so going back and forth is sometimes a big headache when there are demonstrations and there's blockage of roads and people are held at checkpoints and so forth. So it's not an easy life here, but we slug it on, as they say. And in my situation, I mean, I'd rather talk about the other people because I'm actually very lucky in that I have only been held a few times, but never really injured severely or anything. Or, just in the past 24 hours, 60 people were killed, including an 8-month-old baby. So I'd rather we talk about those guys rather than me.
Well, okay, well, what were they doing? I mean, were they just innocently protesting? I mean, why were these people killed?
Yeah, I mean, Gaza Strip is basically an open-air prison. It has 2 million people that the United Nations already made the report that's unlivable. Most of these 2 million people are refugees. They can literally see the homes they were kicked out from across this fence that Israel put illegally around Gaza. Israel is besieging Gaza and causing starvation basically in Gaza. Most of these people are desperately poor, hungry people, no jobs, no life. As I said, most of them are refugees, and they can see their beautiful lands across the fence. And so they were protesting to be able to return to their homes and lands, a right of return that is guaranteed by international law and by international humanitarian law. And by UN resolutions, actually, that they have a right to return to their homes and lands. Israel denies them this basic and fundamental right. And so they protest and they try to walk back to their villages. And when they come close to this horrible fence that Israel is keeping around them in Gaza Strip as a prison, Israel gave orders to its soldiers to shoot people who even come within like 150 meters of the fence of the wall around Gaza. So they're basically sniping them, shooting ducks in a barrel, as they say, or shooting turkeys, if you want. It is a very easy scheme of killing Palestinians.
And they're not even on the Israel side. They're on their own side, which I mean, I know the whole thing is ridiculous, but they're on their own side. They're not even in the Israel side, and they're still getting shot at, not doing anything, just too close to the fence.
Well, they are protesting, and they are demanding the right to return home. But yes, to Israel, that looks like an existential threat because Israel doesn't want the 7.5 million refugees that it created claiming any of their rights. And so Israel is happy to shoot them. And Israel is engaged in a slow genocide of Gaza. These people are basically knowing that there's a danger because the Israeli military actually dropped leaflets on Gaza saying anybody who comes even within 100 meters of the fence will be shot on sight. It doesn't matter if it's a child or a mother or whoever. And so it had warned them, but these people are desperate, as I said, and to them, death by hunger is not any more merciful than death by bullets through the heads. So they are challenging this siege of Gaza. They are challenging the Israeli colonization of their lands and homes, and the ethnic cleansing that Israel continues to perpetrate against our people. So that's why they shoot them. And I think it's, imagine anywhere else in the world, if 60 unarmed civilians, demonstrators were killed by live bullets and over 2,700 injured, more than 800 of them injured by live ammunition. Number of amputees now are in the hundreds in Gaza. Imagine if this was happening anywhere else in the world, what would be the reaction of the world? There would be calls for invasion of that country that's perpetuating this massacre and bloodbath of its civilians. But the world is silent, and with the exception of few countries that spoke out, like South Africa pulled its ambassador from Israel. Turkey has declared 3 days of mourning and so on. But generally, the US and the European Union are sitting around on the fence and not saying anything.
Did this all happen over the last 24 hours, or are you adding up the casualties?
60 people are actually over the last 24 hours, 2,700 people, 2,700 people who were injured are all in the past 24 hours. If we look at when the disturbances started on March 30th, which is Land Day here, it's a day that we commemorate our connections to Palestine, to our land. Since that time, in the past few weeks, basically, Israel has killed over 100 Palestinians and injured over 7,000 Palestinians.
Is there proper medical care for those 7,000 that have been injured, or because they're all from the Gaza Strip, and my understanding is they don't even have basic supplies. What happens to those 7,000 people that are injured?
Yeah, this is a problem. Gaza hospitals have run out of supplies, basically, to treat the injured. And so we expect more deaths that could be prevented if there was access to medical care. That's another symptom of the Israeli siege of Gaza and the, strangulation of Gaza. So there has been calls for international medical intervention. The Palestinian Authority has also called for international protection of the Palestinian people. Again, to this day, we have not heard any response from the international community other than feeble words of guarded regrets and sorry that this is happening kind of thing. Human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and even the Israeli human rights organizations like B'Tselem have said that there is some horrible things happening and people should get involved and should stop this Israeli, onslaught on the Palestinian civilian population. But again, I hope that the world will pay attention to this situation.
Now, the whole world should know at this point that the Gaza Strip is unlivable. The water is polluted. There isn't supplies for hospitals. Even the Israelis admit to all of this. Do you compare this to almost like a concentration camp, prison that these people are in on purpose?
Yes, Israel policy from the beginning has been to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from their homes and lands, hopefully to nearby countries like Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, where now most of the Palestinians live, but then to treat the remaining Palestinians as prisoners, basically, and store them in warehouses. I call it Palestinian warehouses. So there's the warehouse of Bethlehem, the warehouse of Ramallah, and the warehouse of Gaza, where they store people in those places. Now, warehouse is a kind of terminology that I use, but people have used ghettos, concentration camps, Bantustans, whatever you want to call it. Israel itself says we have a system of hafrada. Hafrada is in Hebrew means segregation, which the word segregation in Afrikaner language is apartheid. So you can call it apartheid, you can call it segregation, you can call it hafrada, whatever you want to call it. The obvious ramifications of this is taking the land without the people, storing the people in the worst possible conditions in very small pieces of land like Gaza, and letting them rot, basically, as one Israeli minister said. We put them on a diet and let them rot there. We don't care. So that's the policy, if you want.
Well, the Western media often portrays the Palestinians as doing things that instigate these violent acts. They say that they place the children in positions so that, that they'll be sitting ducks themselves. Now, what do you say to that?
Well, it's expected, of course. What do you expect colonizers to do? What do you expect them to say about the native people? If you recall, white European colonizers in North America, for example. They didn't say we're coming here to butcher these natives and take their land. They said we're circling the wagons, we're bringing civilization and technology and modern agriculture to this backward continent. And in the case of Africa, was a dark continent. But in any case, the natives are savages, barbarians, terrorists. They're attacking us for no obvious reasons. We merely circle the wagons, protect ourselves, build forts to protect ourselves from these native, crazy people, if you want. That is natural propaganda that any colonizer uses and must use, of course, to justify what they are doing. Otherwise, how are they going to justify it? So it's expected. What is not expected, of course, is for the era of 21st century, with international law supposedly and the United Nations and a humanitarian law and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for people to sit around and watch this and let it pass. I think this is what hurts us Palestinians most, is the apathy and the ignorance of the rest of the world that looks at this and is not moving nearly enough. I mean, I don't want to generalize too much because there's a lot of good people of goodwill around the world who are in solidarity with us, and they demonstrate and they hold rallies and they even do civil disobedience in the US and other countries to try and bring attention to this humanitarian tragedy here. And I hope that things are changing. I do see more and more of those people coming around. And I see a growth of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, similar to what we had with South Africa under apartheid. So I do see signs of hope, and I don't want to draw a very, totally negative picture of what's going on.
Well, it's kind of hard not to be negative knowing what this is the worst day, last 24 hours. But let me ask you, many Jewish people are not in alignment with this. In fact, with the U.S. Embassy moving to Jerusalem, there has been an allegiance of people protesting it, which includes a lot of Jewish people. Can you explain that? Because I think a lot of Western people believe that all the Jewish people are for this, but that's fundamentally not true.
Well, I mean, when you say Jewish people, I mean, there's people who happen to be Jewish, there are people who happen to be Muslim, and people who happen to be Christian, and we're all people. And people behave magnificently sometimes, and sometimes they behave horribly. And we have seen that, Christianity, for example, my own religion, if you remember, we had the Crusaders and we had people under the banner of Christianity doing horrible acts, like in the Second World War and the First World War. Now, in terms of the present situation, just like South Africa, there were white people who joined the struggle with the black people, because it's a joint struggle. It is not actually even showing solidarity. It's a joint struggle for human rights. And the struggle in South Africa was not between black people and white people. And the same here. The struggle is not between Jews and Arabs, so to speak. What horrible terminologies to use, because there are actually also Jewish Arabs, Arab speaking Jews in this country and other countries. So the struggle here is between those who support racism, chauvinistic, ethnocentric nationalism, and a Jewish state, and those who support human rights, dignity, equality. Just like in South Africa, the struggle was between those who supported apartheid and those who opposed apartheid. And there were black and white people on both sides. There were whites who supported the struggle against apartheid, and there were blacks who also supported apartheid and thought there was nothing wrong with apartheid. So the same thing here. There are Jews, Muslims, Christians who are opposed to apartheid. There are also Jews, Muslims, and Christians who support apartheid, unfortunately.
Well, let me ask you, what would you want the world community to do? Would you, from a military standpoint, would bringing in some soldiers and armies in the Gaza Strip and around the Palestinian just to keep you safe and to have people stop shooting at your people, almost like a police safety force? Is that something that would be helpful?
No, my main and our Palestinians have called for decency, for implementation of international law, and for the rest of the world community, especially governments like Britain, France, and the US, which traditionally supported the Jewish state and the apartheid system, for them to show some decency and stop cajoling apartheid and stop basically allowing Israel to get away with murder, literally, get away with murder. This is, to let Israel have impunity from international law is unacceptable in the 21st century. And so the first step, in my humble opinion, is for the citizens of those Western countries that support apartheid, support the racism, and support the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, to say, stop it, stop supporting, because you are partners in crime. When these governments stop supporting this system on its own will collapse. Israel cannot survive 1 week without U.S. protection, without U.S. money, without U.S. support, without U.S. use of veto at the United Nations to protect Israel from international law. Israel cannot survive without the United States. So the U.S. is a partner in crime. And what we are saying is enough of this. And the international community needs to stop being a partner in crime, but be an actual partner in peacemaking, human rights, and justice. I am not for military interventions anywhere. I am for human rights, for justice, for implementation of international law. And it can be done just like we did it with South Africa, with applying sanctions on this rogue regime here, with applying boycotts, divestments, with mobilizing the world community to say its words, to speak out. Of course, we Palestinians will continue to resist. Most of our resistance is nonviolent popular resistance, and we will continue to do that. 99% of it is popular resistance. And the people in Gaza, for example, are being massacred even though they are not using arms against Israel. Not one Israeli soldier was scratched in the latest episode that we mentioned, killed and injured thousands of people.
Well, as you know, because you lived here for a long time, our Western media is very controlled, and it is owned pretty lock, stock, and barrel by the Israel lobby. And so what people learn about this is anybody who talks against Israel in any kind of way, they make us out to be anti-Semitic, racist against the Jewish cause, and we're anti-Jew, we're like the Nazis. Instead of just looking at the plight of the Palestinians and seeing it as a human rights violation. What do you say to I know people around me that think that way. As soon as you say anything, they don't believe it. What do you say to those people to try to get them out of this paradigm, this controlled mind funk that they're in?
I'm actually writing an article about this subject on mental colonization. The idea of conflating Judaism with Zionism, conflating Judaism with what happened here, is an old strategy of the Zionists going back to the 19th century. And the Zionists profit from anti-Semitism, and they formed allies with anti-Semites. The Zionists, for example, have never critiqued extreme right-wing European and American politicians who are bigoted against Jews and Muslims and other minorities, of course, because they think that's their advantage to have those people. So the Zionist movement has significantly profited from real anti-Semitism, and they have also exaggerated and created anti-Semitism to serve their cause. And we have to remember that the Zionist movement is a political movement that is only interested in its own greed and its own interest, not interested in Jewish people or Jewish individuals' well-being. And in fact, they even created this discrimination here in Palestine against Jews of various backgrounds. Eastern Jews, for example, are discriminated against by European Jews. Ethiopian Jews are discriminated against. There are racism here is widespread against Jews and non-Jews, of course, who happen to be not the classic white European Jews who dominate this country, people like Netanyahu. His family came from Poland and colonized this country and wants to establish itself as a dominant ideology. And in that, they are willing to sacrifice Jews. For example, Israel has also did false flag operations, for example, when it planted bombs in synagogues and Jewish community centers in Baghdad in the 1950s, or when it bombed American and British offices in Cairo, also in the 1950s as false flag operations. These are now well exposed and declassified material. So they don't care to hurt particular people to achieve their goals. And if these people happen to be Jewish, that's also fine by the Zionist movement. Ben Gurion, for example, stood against opening the doors for Jewish refugees to England and to America. And the Zionist movement lobbied against that during the Second World War. And immediately after the Second World War, they were against any Jewish immigration to other European countries because they wanted Jewish immigration only here, and they wanted to use the excuse and say that the doors were closed. The doors were closed because the Zionist movement is what closed them. So I say it's important that people learn this history, expose this hypocrisy, and say, no, anti-Semitism is one thing, anti-Zionism is completely another thing. Standing up for human rights and justice is not anti-Semitism. It is, in fact, the opposite. It is pro-Semitism. After all, we Palestinians, Christian Muslims, and native Palestinians are the real Semites. European Jews are not Semites.
Okay, well, there's been an escalation of war on many fronts in the Middle East. Iran and Israel are pretty much in a full-blown war in Syria. And the escalation of troops everywhere around Jordan, around Iran, is happening on a pretty swift basis here. Do you foresee this turning into a full-blown war against Iran as well as Syria?
Well, I think you bring up the local geopolitical structure in Western Asia, which is actually very important to look at, because indeed it could lead us not to a war against Iran, which has been going on for the past, since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, there's been a war in Iran. We have to remember that the U.S. military even downed the civilian Iranian jet that was holding 279 passengers in 1988. And George Bush at the time said that he would never apologize for the United States in any situation. So the U.S. has been attacking Iran. But what is a danger now is that there could be a full-blown global war, basically, instigated by Israel, which has been desperately trying to get the U.S. into wars in the Middle East and has done it successfully in the case of Afghanistan and Iraq. The Israel lobby is the one that pushed for these wars, especially on Iraq. And there are plenty of documents to support this if you want. And there are people who've written books about the subject. For example, Mearsheimer and Walt, two professors, University of Chicago and Harvard University, wrote a book about the Israel lobby and its role in pushing the war in Iraq. And they have pushed for the war in Syria, and they have pushed for now the war in Yemen, and the war in Libya, and the war in Iran now. So Israel lobby has been pushing for conflict, endless conflict in the Middle East, because it supposedly serves Zionist interest. Of course, sometimes it backfires on them. Wars do not necessarily come out with the outcome that those who push for them expect. So I anticipate that if they keep pushing for the war in Iran, that it will backfire on them in the same way the war in Iraq backfired on the Zionist movement. And we have a government in Iraq now, including with the latest elections, even more a government that supports human rights for the Palestinians and opposes Israeli and American hegemony in the Middle East.
Well, a lot of people believe that the United States is a puppet of Israel, and mostly because of the Israeli lobby that is so strong here and the complete control of our media, right? You got those two forces and we become a puppet of another country. Do you see that as a reality, or do you think that the United States itself has an agenda here? Because I don't see what our benefit is in any of this.
Indeed, the Israel lobby, the Zionist lobby, actually, we should call it, because it existed in America even before the State of Israel was created. The Zionist lobby in the U.S. is very powerful. I wouldn't say it's all that mighty or powerful in a way that we should give up the struggle. We have seen occasionally some American presidents who show some backbone. For example, when Eisenhower in 1956 stood up against the Israel lobby and the Zionist lobby, and stood up even for Britain and France and demanded Israel withdraw from the Sinai and the Gaza Strip. And then came President Kennedy, who tried to do some things, including challenge Israel on the nuclear weapons issues, because Israel was developing nuclear weapons, and also on other issues, including the refugees. And some people say that that's perhaps why he was assassinated by a deep state. But I don't want to get into all that. But the bottom line is there were some presidents who tried to challenge Israel and its lobby, and we think that decency can work if people push for it. We know that people power is still a power. We know that when people mobilized against the war in Vietnam, although it took us a long time, we finally pushed the politicians who were profiting from the war in Vietnam to end that war. So I think there's a great potential for people power to match special interest power, if you want, like the Israel lobby.
So what is the ultimate goal of Israel in the region?
Well, the strategy was laid out actually in the 1970s and 80s in a number of research papers by Israeli tacticians and politicians. And that is to keep the Arab world divided and keep it fighting endless wars with each other. Hence, you have the fight between supposedly Saudi Arabia and Iran, and in Syria and in Iraq, and sectarian fights and so forth. Divide and conquer, basically. This is the policy of the Israeli state that was formulated actually at the beginning of the Zionist project in the late 19th century and early 20th century. But then it actually proceeded to expand, as I said, after the 1967 war. In the 1970s, it was formalized into policy. The policy is to keep, like Henry Kissinger, who was a key Zionist in the American administration, when he was asked one day after he retired and left office, he was asked what was our policy with regards to Iran and Iraq. They were fighting each other at the time. And he said, well, our policy is simple, to get them to kill each other.
Oh,
And indeed,
jeez.
that was the policy, is to, and if they saw that Iran was winning, they gave Iran weapons at one point, the Iran-Contra deal under Reagan.
Unfortunately, we just got cut off and it took us a while to get reconnected. So I'm just going to start with a new question because we don't quite know where we're at. Let me ask you, what do you believe the Rothschilds' role is in Zionism? They are widely considered the wealthiest family in the world, which we don't really know what their wealth is. Are they heavily behind the Zionist movement?
Well, the Rothschilds as a family started supporting the Zionist movement in the late 19th century, immediately after the Zionist movement was created. And yeah, I mean, but there are a lot of other influential families that joined. I wouldn't say all the Rothschilds did this. There were some Rothschilds who were not supportive of the Zionist project. But the difference, of course, is that those who support the Zionist project put their money where their mouth is, and they do it. Those who don't support it, sometimes they just are don't care and they don't participate. So Alice Rothschild is a friend of mine. She is a normal human being who cares about Palestinian rights, which is opposite to the majority of her family, if you want, who are Zionist. So it's a different thing.
Yeah, well, it's hard when the wealthiest people in the world are Zionists, right? I mean, that yields a lot of, and the question is why? Why do they have everything they could want? Why do they care about controlling that part of the world?
Well, you'll have to ask them this question. I think it's a misled movement, personally. I mean, if I was Jewish, I would not support Zionism. I would be like the many Jews who are anti-Zionist in this world. Some Jews who are arrested with me as we protest the occupation and so forth. So I don't know why some Jews think that Zionism is good for Jews, so to speak. Zionism has, in my humble opinion, and the opinion of many Jews who oppose it, was the worst thing to happen to Judaism in 2,000 years. It promoted anti-Semitism, something we talked about earlier, and it created animosity, and it created basically a system here that is rather sick psychologically. When you have a system of apartheid, not just against Palestinians, but you get a hierarchy in society where the Ashkenazi European Jews are at the top, and then you have Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, and then you have Ethiopian Jews, and then you have Palestinians inside the Green Line, and then you have Druze and others. It is a hierarchical system of racism. This is not good, and it's not bringing repute to Judaism in any way or helping Judaism. It helped an elite group of people who profited from it. People like Netanyahu are profiting from it. People that are not, common Israelis don't profit from it. 25% of Israelis are actually Israeli children live below the poverty line. So it is not profiting Jews or Israelis, it's profiting the elites and the greedy people like the Netanyahus, like the Kushners of the world, and Ivanka Trump and all these people. That's who it profits, that's who supports it.
Well, some people believe there's two thoughts. There's some people that believe that they're for it because they want this is a propaganda maybe. The Jewish state is needed because there's so much anti-Semitism and we need a place for ours. And then the other thought is that they just think that they're superior to everyone, everybody's beneath them, and that this is their God-given right, or Luciferian given right, whatever it is that they worship.
Yes, I mean, it is similar to what happened to blacks in North America, who, of course, a majority of them resisted discrimination. There was a minority of blacks in North America who said, you cannot live with white people. So let's go live in our own country, create our own state. And I went to Africa and randomly selected a place and called it Liberia. And to this day, there's a problem between the American black colonizers in Liberia and the native Liberians, native people of that country. Similar thing happened here. Now, you can argue that that's a rational decision, but I would argue that people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Edwin Douglas, and others had a better idea, which is the idea of humanity can live in diverse societies and that we can fight discrimination together, people of various backgrounds. People who try to fight discrimination by creating their own discrimination against others do not work because societies reject the ideas of monolithic societies. So the idea of creating a Jewish state here is an idea that in itself has a problem because it tries to make this country Jewish, a country that's majority, was not Jewish, and it's multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society. It does not accept the notion of a Jewish character of the country. So in the same that we didn't accept the Christian character of the country at the time of the Crusaders, or a Muslim character of the country at the time of one Muslim ruler that tried to make it Muslim. This is unacceptable and it will not last. We will go back to being multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society, as we've always been over 11,000 years of Palestinian history. So I am optimistic that this is just a temporary phase. And it is, as I said, it's not good for Jews because it's not good for human beings in general.
Well, don't you think that multi-religion and multiculture and all this stuff is just the natural state of human beings?
Yes, I'm a biologist. I believe if you look at forest, a diverse ecosystem is a stronger ecosystem than an ecosystem that's dominated by one species. Same thing for human societies. A diverse society has strengths. A society that tries to be monolithic, all one religion or all one skin color or whatever, is a society that's intrinsically, I think, weak and will not last, and is rejected by common sense and by human nature. Humans love diversity, and I know this from my own family is diverse in religions and other backgrounds.
Would you, before we get into the last question here, would you stay after and answer a question for my patrons? It's the way I keep funding this channel I have.
Okay.
But before we get into that, will you tell people how they can get your work? I know you have a blog, and then how they can support your work.
Well, they can go to our website, which is palestinenature.org. We have palestinenature.org. It's a website which talks about our Museum of Natural History that we founded here. It's a museum of natural history and institute for biodiversity and sustainability. It's trying to show the way to Palestinians of the various religions and backgrounds that there is a way forward for sustainability, for food security, for protecting the environment while maintaining diversity of nature and diversity of people. This is basically the mission of our museum, and they can contact us through the website or by email at info@palestinenature.org. We welcome international volunteers. We always have many international volunteers. We provide room and board for them. And so we welcome support of any kind, whether in labor or donation of money or equipment or books or anything. We would welcome that.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for doing everything that you're doing. And hopefully we can give you some bright light and prayers from this part of the world.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I appreciate it.